Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me today. I wish I could begin with cheerful news, but I cannot. The truth, however uncomfortable it may be, must be spoken. And the truth is this: America is in deeper trouble than most of us have been led to believe. Let me start with a question that might strike a chord in every household across this nation. How is it that in the richest country in the history of the world, tens of millions struggle to pay rent, feed their families, or afford health care? How did we reach a point where working two jobs still doesn't guarantee a decent life? My friends, the answer is both simple and alarming. Our economic system, once hailed as the model of success, is now collapsing under its own weight. We are told that unemployment is low, that the stock market is strong, that the economy is booming. But step outside Wall Street and walk into Main Street, you'll see a different America. You'll see shuttered stores, rising homelessness, and families drowning in debt. You'll see young people burdened by student loans so massive that they delay starting families. You'll see workers producing more than ever before, yet their wages have barely moved in decades. This is not prosperity, it's a mirage. The phrase economic mirage exposed captures the unsettling truth behind America's so called prosperity, a prosperity that glitters on the surface but conceals deep cracks underneath. For years, political leaders, media outlets, and corporate executives have painted a picture of a nation thriving economically. They boast about record stock market highs, rising GDP, and low unemployment rates as proof that the system works. But as Professor Richard D. Wolff sharply reveals, this glowing image is not reality. It's an illusion carefully crafted to disguise the pain and instability lurking beneath the numbers. Imagine standing in a desert dying of thirst and seeing an oasis shimmering in the distance. You run toward it with hope, only to discover it's a mirage, a reflection of light on hot air. That, Wolff argues, is the American economy today. On paper, it looks healthy. In practice, it's running on debt, inequality, and exploitation. While Wall Street celebrates record profits, millions of working Americans are trapped in a cycle of rising costs, stagnant wages, and mounting anxiety about their future. The booming economy is booming only for a privileged few, while the majority struggle to survive its shockwaves. Politicians frequently cite low unemployment as evidence that America is doing great. But what they don't mention is the quality of those jobs. Many Americans are working two or even three part-time jobs without benefits, health care, or security. These are not careers, they're survival tactics. A low unemployment rate means little when it hides the reality that millions are underemployed, overworked, and underpaid. The illusion of success depends on ignoring those who live paycheck to paycheck, the invisible workforce that keeps the economic machine running but never shares in its rewards. Wolff's analysis cuts deeper by challenging the idea that rising stock prices reflect genuine national progress. The stock market, he reminds us, measures the fortunes of corporations and investors, not the living standards of ordinary citizens. When the Dow Jones soars, CEOs celebrate with bonuses, while workers face layoffs, automation, and wage freezes. The disconnect between financial success and social well-being has become so vast that the economy no longer serves the people. Instead, people serve the economy. The supposed prosperity is sustained by credit cards, student loans, and mortgages, temporary fixes masking long-term decline. Perhaps the most shocking element of this mirage is how skillfully it's maintained. Political leaders use selective statistics, media networks highlight success stories, and corporations fund narratives of endless growth. Yet beneath the glitter lies a dark truth. Nearly 60% of Americans cannot afford an unexpected $1,000 expense. Families are forced to choose between healthcare and housing, education and groceries. This is not the sign of a strong economy. It's the symptom of a system built to enrich a minority while the majority sinks deeper into precarity. Professor Wolff warns that this deception cannot last forever. Like every mirage, it fades when the heat rises, when people begin to question what they've been told and demand to see the real landscape. The American economy, he argues, must be judged not by corporate profits or GDP growth, but by how well it supports its people. The illusion of prosperity may have fooled the public for years, but cracks are appearing and the truth is emerging. America's economic miracle is not a blessing, it's a warning. Across the American landscape, a silent struggle defines the daily reality of millions. The working class, once the backbone of national prosperity, now finds itself under siege. The proud ideal of the American dream, that hard work guarantees stability and success, has faded into something more like a haunting echo. Professor Richard D. Wolff captures this decline with sharp precision, revealing how the system that once promised opportunity now traps workers in a cycle of exhaustion and insecurity. The signs are everywhere: longer hours, stagnant wages, eroded benefits, and a gnawing fear that tomorrow will be harder than today. Consider the paradox. Productivity in the United States has soared over the past 4 decades, yet wages for most workers have barely moved. The average American produces more wealth than ever before, but that wealth flows upward, not outward. Corporate profits break records, while paychecks stagnate. The fruits of labor have been harvested by a small elite, leaving the people who actually create value with only the remnants. It's as if the modern worker is running faster and faster on a treadmill that never stops, yet somehow ends up in the same place or worse, falling behind. Behind the polished reports of economic growth lies a harsher truth. Much of that growth comes from squeezing more out of workers for less. Full-time jobs have been replaced by part-time contracts, temporary gigs, and flexible employment that offers no stability. The term flexibility, once seen as empowerment, has been twisted into exploitation. Workers are told to be grateful for any job at all, even if it comes without health care, paid leave, or a pension. The result is a generation constantly balancing on the edge of financial collapse, where one medical bill or one missed paycheck can mean disaster. Wolff highlights another cruel irony. The wealthiest corporations depend on low wages to sustain their dominance, while taxpayers subsidize the survival of those very workers through public assistance programs. In essence, the working class is paying twice, once through their labor and again through their taxes, which fund the corporate system that keeps them impoverished. It's not just unfair, it's a betrayal of the social contract. The worker who once took pride in building the nation now finds themselves building profits for executives they will never meet, while their own living standards decline. The psychological toll is just as devastating as the financial one. The constant stress of economic precarity seeps into every corner of life. Families delay having children, individuals sacrifice education for survival, and entire communities are hollowed out by disappearing industries. A culture of anxiety replaces a culture of hope. When people begin to see hard work as futile, social cohesion begins to fray. Wolff warns that this erosion of dignity is not an accident. It's the predictable outcome of an economy designed to prioritize shareholders over citizens. There's a dangerous illusion that the working class has adapted to this reality, but beneath the surface, resentment and fatigue grow. Workers know the system is rigged. They feel it in every unpaid overtime hour and every rent increase that outpaces their income. They are told the economy is strong, yet they can't afford to participate in it. That contradiction, Wolff insists, is the ticking heartbeat of a deeper crisis. The siege of the working class is not just an economic issue, it's a moral one. It asks whether a nation that depends on the suffering of its workers can still claim to be prosperous or even free. The numbers are staggering, almost surreal. The top 1% of Americans now own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined, a statistic that should shake the conscience of any society that calls itself democratic. Professor Richard D. Wolff warns that this is not merely an imbalance, it is a rupture, a dangerous widening of the gap that threatens the stability of the nation itself. The wealth gap has become the defining feature of 21st century America, not as a symptom of progress, but as evidence of deep decay within the economic system. What was once inequality has now grown into something closer to economic apartheid. At first glance, inequality may seem abstract, just numbers on a graph or a talking point in a political debate. But behind those numbers lie real lives. On one side, we see a small elite living in unimaginable luxury, private jets, offshore accounts, estates that stretch beyond sight. On the other side, millions of families work endless hours just to afford rent, groceries, and health care. The contrast is so extreme it has become obscene. The wealth gap is not simply about who has more, it's about who has power, security, and a voice and who does not. Wolff exposes how this chasm didn't appear overnight. It was engineered through decades of policy decisions, deregulation, and corporate influence. Tax systems were rewritten to favor the wealthy, unions were weakened, and social safety nets were cut under the guise of efficiency. Productivity rose, but wages stalled. Each year, more of the nation's wealth flowed upward into the hands of those already rich. The result is an economy that looks less like a shared system of opportunity and more like a pyramid with millions supporting the comfort of a few at the top. The effects of this concentration of wealth ripple through every aspect of American life. Housing prices have soared beyond reach for average families because investors treat homes not as places to live, but as financial assets. Education, once the great equalizer, has become a luxury burdened by crushing student debt. Healthcare remains a privilege rather than a right, with millions uninsured or underinsured. The American dream, the belief that hard work leads to upward mobility, has become a cruel illusion for those trapped at the bottom of the economic ladder. Perhaps most alarming is how the wealth gap corrodes democracy itself. Money buys influence, and influence shapes policy. The ultra-rich fund political campaigns, lobby for favorable regulations, and control the media narratives that frame public debate. In this cycle, economic power converts seamlessly into political power, silencing the majority while amplifying the voices of the few. Wolff cautions that when democracy bends too far toward wealth, it ceases to be democracy at all. It becomes plutocracy. The social consequences are visible in the anger simmering across the country. Economic frustration fuels political polarization, resentment, and distrust in institutions. People sense that the system no longer serves them, it serves those who already have everything. The wealth gap isn't just a statistic, it's the invisible wall dividing America into two nations, one of abundance and one of survival. Wolff's analysis is both a warning and a wake-up call. The deeper this divide grows, the harder it will be to bridge. The question that now hangs over America is whether it still has the will and the courage to close that gap before it consumes the very foundations of the republic. Across the United States, an invisible unraveling is taking place. Threads of trust, unity, and shared identity that once bound the nation together are now fraying under immense pressure. Professor Richard D. Wolff warns that the economic crisis has not only hollowed out wallets, it has hollowed out the soul of American society. The collapse of the social fabric is not an abstract concept. It is visible in the polarization of communities, the loss of civic engagement, the rise of anger and despair, and the deepening sense that Americans no longer live in the same moral or economic universe. What we are witnessing is not just an economic downturn, but the disintegration of the common ground that made the country whole. For generations, America's strength came from a sense of shared purpose, the idea that while people might differ in class, color, or belief, they were still part of one collective story. Today, that story is fractured. Economic inequality has split the nation into parallel realities. On one side are those who feel insulated from crisis, thriving in a digital, globalized economy. On the other are those left behind, watching their communities decline while being told that the nation is doing great. This disconnect breeds resentment and hopelessness, emotions that quickly turn into division and rage. When people feel excluded from prosperity, they lose trust not only in the economy but in each other. Wolff argues that this disintegration is not accidental. It is the logical outcome of decades of policies that placed profit over people. As corporations relocated industries overseas in pursuit of cheaper labor, once vibrant towns were left desolate. Families that had built their identities around work, pride, and stability saw everything vanish. The factory jobs that once united neighbors are gone, replaced by low-wage service work that isolates rather than connects. Without stable employment and fair wages, communities lose their glue. Local businesses close, schools decline, and social institutions weaken. Economic decay becomes social decay. At the same time, the political system, instead of healing these wounds, has deepened them. Politicians exploit division, turning economic frustration into cultural warfare. Media outlets, driven by clicks and ratings, amplify outrage rather than understanding. The result is an atmosphere of suspicion where Americans no longer see one another as fellow citizens, but as rivals in a zero-sum game. The sense of we has vanished, replaced by an ever-expanding us versus them. Wolff warns that such fragmentation is a symptom of a society losing its cohesion, and once that fabric tears too far, it cannot be easily mended. The psychological consequences are equally severe. Rising anxiety, depression, and loneliness reflect not just individual struggles, but collective ones. Communities once defined by solidarity are now marked by isolation. The promise that working hard would lead to a better future has collapsed, leaving people feeling betrayed and powerless. In that void, extremism, cynicism, and nihilism thrive. People turn inward, away from civic life, because they no longer believe participation matters. The nation's spirit, its belief in fairness, cooperation, and shared destiny, is eroding. Professor Wolff's warning is as social as it is economic. When inequality reaches such extremes, it doesn't just redistribute wealth, it reshapes morality. A society that normalizes greed, competition, and exploitation begins to lose empathy. It becomes a place where success is admired, but compassion is seen as weakness. The collapse of the social fabric, then, is not only about money, it is about meaning. It is the slow fading of the values that once held America together. And if that collapse continues unchecked, the danger ahead will not be just economic instability, it will be the loss of the nation's very identity. For decades, America has been told that its economic wounds can be healed with minor adjustments, a new tax cut, a temporary stimulus, a tweak to interest rates. But Professor Richard D. Wolff dismantles this illusion with sharp clarity, arguing that these so called solutions are little more than cosmetic bandages on a system that is fundamentally broken. The problem, he insists, is not the symptoms, it is the structure itself. What the nation faces is not a temporary malfunction of capitalism, but a system functioning exactly as designed, enriching the few at the expense of the many. The time for patches and promises is over. What's needed is systemic change, not surface level reform. Wolff draws attention to a recurring pattern in American history. Each economic crisis, whether the Great Depression, the recession of the 1970s, the 2008 financial collapse, or the current inflationary struggles, has been met with short-term policies meant to stabilize the economy without challenging its foundations. Politicians deliver speeches about recovery, corporations receive bailouts, and ordinary citizens are told to wait for the benefits to trickle down. Yet, time after time, those benefits never arrive. The same inequalities persist, the same insecurities deepen, and the same elites profit. These cycles are not coincidences, they are the predictable consequences of a system built to preserve power rather than distribute opportunity. At the heart of Wolff's argument lies a piercing question. How long can a society endure when its solutions are designed to protect the problem? Cosmetic fixes, like corporate tax incentives, minimal wage increases, or token social programs, create the illusion of progress while maintaining the underlying dynamics of exploitation. They offer relief without justice, stability without fairness. In truth, they are not solutions at all. They are delays meant to quiet discontent without addressing its cause. The structure of ownership and decision making in the economy remains untouched, ensuring that wealth and control remain concentrated in the same hands. Wolff urges Americans to imagine a different kind of economy, one where workers are not mere instruments of profit, but active participants in shaping their workplaces and communities. Real change, he argues, begins with democratizing the economy itself. If democracy is a principle we cherish in politics, why is it absent in our workplaces, where most adults spend the majority of their lives? In a system where decisions are made by the few for the benefit of the few, democracy remains incomplete. Systemic change means shifting from corporate hierarchies to cooperative models, businesses owned and managed by those who do the work, not by distant shareholders chasing quarterly gains. He also exposes how the political establishment resists such transformation. Both major parties, deeply influenced by corporate donors, frame reform as dangerous or unrealistic. They warn that fundamental change could destabilize markets, as if markets were more sacred than the people who make them possible. Wolff calls this the great American contradiction, a nation that prides itself on freedom but defends an economic order that denies most people power over their own labor. It's a system that teaches citizens to fear change more than injustice. The hook that defines Wolff's message is simple yet radical. America's crises are not accidents but outcomes. Inequality, debt, and insecurity are not glitches in the system. They are the system. To fix them, America must stop repainting a collapsing house and start rebuilding its foundation. The question is not whether the nation can afford systemic change. It's whether it can survive without it. Professor Richard D. Wolff's call for economic democracy is not a mere academic proposal. It is a moral demand, a rallying cry for a nation on the brink of collapse to reclaim control over its economic destiny. He argues that true democracy cannot exist when the vast majority of people have no voice in the institutions where they spend most of their waking hours, the workplace. Political democracy without economic democracy, he warns, is like a tree without roots. You can vote every 4 years, but if you spend 40 hours a week under the authority of unelected corporate bosses, your freedom is an illusion. His message cuts through the noise of politics. To save democracy, America must democratize its economy. The concept of economic democracy begins with a simple but revolutionary idea that those who do the work should also have a say in how that work is organized, what it produces, and how its rewards are distributed. In Wolff's view, capitalism has reduced workers to cogs in a machine, stripping them of agency and dignity. Decisions about production, pricing, wages, and layoffs are made not by the people affected, but by executives and shareholders whose primary motive is profit. This concentration of power has not only deepened inequality, but also eroded the very principles of fairness and participation that democracy is supposed to uphold. Imagine, Wolff suggests, what society could look like if businesses operated as worker cooperatives, enterprises owned and managed collectively by those who contribute their labor. In such a model, workers would vote on major decisions, share in the profits they help generate, and hold real responsibility for the direction of their organization. Instead of competition driven by greed, cooperation would become the engine of progress. Productivity would still matter, but so would justice. Profit would serve the community, not dominate it. This is not a utopian fantasy. It is a tested model that already exists in parts of Europe and within small but successful enterprises in the United States. Wolff emphasizes that economic democracy is not just about ethics, it is about survival. When economic power is concentrated in a few hands, political corruption follows. Wealth buys influence, and influence rewrites the rules to protect wealth. The cycle tightens until democracy becomes a performance rather than a practice. By redistributing power at the workplace level, society can begin to break this cycle. When people participate directly in economic decision-making, they become more invested in the collective good, more accountable, and less vulnerable to manipulation by corporate or political elites. The most compelling hook in Wolff's analysis lies in its challenge to redefine what freedom truly means. Freedom, he argues, is not the right to choose between brands or political parties. It is the power to shape one's material conditions, to have real control over one's livelihood. The current system offers choice without power, participation without impact. Economic democracy would restore balance by aligning everyday labor with the democratic values Americans claim to cherish. This vision demands courage, a willingness to imagine a nation where democracy extends beyond the ballot box and into the boardroom. It means questioning long-held assumptions about ownership, hierarchy, and profit. Wolff's call is both urgent and hopeful, a demand for a system where workers are not expendable tools, but empowered citizens. In this vision, America does not abandon capitalism. It outgrows it, evolving toward a more just, inclusive, and genuinely democratic economy.